So this article is about 4 months old at this point, but I still think the arguments being made in this article are very, very good and still very, very much relevant. So if we cover something or we touch something on this article that you think, well, that's a bit old, we already know that, then fair enough. But there are some interesting points that this article does bring up about sort of PR and proportional representation. The fact that even the Tories know that there is a massive driving hunger to reform our voting system that is not going away. They hoped that they had seen it off back in sort of 2012, with the AV vote. But no, they haven't. There is still this hunger to reform the voting system, and it's only getting more and more stronger because people are realizing that this first past the post system that we have is not a good system. It does not really help build a good sort of political coalition or a good sort of set of political parties in this case. Instead, it sort of locks the system into very established parties, and that is it. And it doesn't give the sort of political depth that some people might want from a new voting system. And as I've said, it's not just Westminster voting that needs reforming as well. Even Conservatives vastly agree with us on this, that the House of Lords needs to be reformed as well. So, election reform is coming. And like it or not, the Tories know it as well. Even if they are desperate to try and maybe put the brakes on it, they can't ever stop it. It's coming. So before we go diving into this article, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. Oh no, actually, do not use the Buy Me a Coffee link. Sorry, I'm so automatic. Yeah, do not use the Buy Me a Coffee link because I've just found out it's been hacked. So do not use the Buy Me a Coffee link, at least yet. So use instead the YouTube thank you button. If you want to do a one-off donation link. So yeah, over we go to the Times on this. The title of "The Tories May Never Recover if They Lose in 2024." It takes a glass or two of wine, but some Tories are beginning to whisper a very heretical thought. Might it be better to lose the next election? The argument goes like this. The outlook for the next few years is grim. Just look at the anemic economic growth forecasts for the first half of the next parliament, i.e. the 1.4% at best, and the Tories have been in power for 12 years, 14 by the time of the next election. The need of a period of opposition to actually refresh themselves. A Tory defeat in 2024 would most likely hand power to some kind of progressive arrangement led in Parliament by Keir Starmer with the support of the Liberal Democrats, perhaps the Scottish Nationalists and Greens. It would struggle to survive any more than a term. And this last point is particularly popular amongst the Tories of a very certain vintage. They point out, in hindsight, it might be better if John Major hadn't won in 1992. Neil Kinnock would have likely been gone by 1997, and there would have been no Tony Blair. Another reason losing seems oddly attractive to some Tories is that the alternative is almost certainly struggling on with a reduced minority. It raises the spectre of the Major years. Remember how tough he found it with a majority of initially just 21. And today's MPs are even more rebellious and even harder to manage. So imagine going into the next election, let's say it's Liz Truss. Can she seriously manage a party where she's gone from a majority of like 84, 80, 82, 81, something like that now? Can she manage going from that to just a majority of like 20, or in the case of Theresa May, it was like 14? given how much rebellious, and he does point it out very correctly, they are very rebellious. And if they know that, they will use that to get their way. Oh, you want this bill through? Well, we want this bill put through first before we even agree to vote yes on yours. If not, we're going to rebel. Oh, remember that UKIP threat David Cameron had to deal with for years? Well, hey, if you don't do what we do with regards to Brexit, well, then we'll walk over to the Reform Party or the Brexit Party, or we'll reform UKIP, I don't know, in some bizarre fashion. It would be incredibly hard for a future Tory leader, whoever they might be, to try and govern that way with a very, very much reduced minority. So, anyway, it continues. Boris Johnson has a majority of 80, yet lives in fear of his backbenchers, dropping planning reforms and much else due to their oppositions. Some old hands fear that governing with a majority of just 20 or 30 would result in 5 years of paralysis by a deserved evisceration in the following general election. Not surprisingly, Tories in ministerial jobs or those who hope for a leg up in the next few years tend to have a different view. You may hear from them about the beneficial things the government is doing, or how dire the consequences would be if the other side took over. Many fret about the cultural changes it would be very hard to reverse. There is a particular concern about a Starmer-led coalition might erase the biological sex from legislation and healthcare in ways that would make it very difficult to restore. But there is a bigger picture, which put all such talk into context. If the Tories lose the next election, changes to the voting system, always demanded by the Lib Dems, may see them locked out of office for a generation. And what happens if the Tories discover, in opposition, that its new coalition of voters don't have much in common post-Brexit? The party could literally fall apart. And I think you are seeing that already. I think this new coalition of voters is very quickly finding it does not have a lot in common with the party after Brexit. It was Johnson and Brexit that brought them together. Well, Johnson's gone. Brexit, as you keep on telling us, has been done. What reason do these new voters have to stay around anyway? It's not even if there's this, if you do get the new voting system in, they're not staying around anyway. So that is definitely probably what we will see at the next election. It's already seems to be happening when you look at sort of the initial polls. So remember, this article was written back in May. So who knows if what happens if this article was written today. So in one sense, the Tories have more to fear from a Starmer-led coalition than an outright Labour victory. The reason electoral reform has never happened is that the first past the post system tends to create majority governments, and so it suits both Labour and the Tories when they are doing well. So once in office, they lose interest in reform. Even the Labour leader, like Blair, who was sympathetic towards the idea of a progressive alliance, wasn't going to change the Westminster voting system that delivered him a 179-seat majority. But a Labour Party that has failed to get 360 seats and hasn't garnered a majority in close to 2 decades would be far more open to electoral reform. And this would be the price demanded by the Lib Dems for their support in a hung parliament. If the Lib Dems' preferred voting system, the single transferable vote or STV, were introduced, it would be devastating for the Tories. And that's the system that we want in place. The single transferable vote is the best, PR voting system there is. I think that's the one we need to go for. So continues, the Electoral Reform Society calculates that the STV would have meant that the Tories winning a majority only twice in the post-war era. Margaret Thatcher would have never been able to govern on her own, and the last election would have seen the Tories 18 shy of a majority. Tactical voting, which works against the Tories, would be hardwired into the system that is an existential threat to them. A Starmer-led coalition could place the cherry on top of this anti-Tory Sunday by even lowering the age of voting from 18 to 16. And this is already in place for the devolved Scottish and Welsh elections, and school-age teenagers would make up around 3.5% of the turnout in the UK elections, a vast majority of which would go to left-wing parties. This points, of course, to a wider threat, less about electoral arithmetic and more about the soul of the party. In the last couple of elections, the Tories have turned themselves into a national party, but broadening the support has come at a cost: the loss of ideological definition. So far, the Tories have been largely successful in holding on to their traditional heartlands. It was helped last time around by the threat of Jeremy Corbyn. The danger he posed to the country's security kept many Tories in the fold, despite their discomfort with the party's more populist mood turn from 2015 to 2019. Being in office has helped too. Power makes party management easier. The prospect of a promotion to ministerial office is one of the few things that keeps the lid on the party descent. In opposition, without the stick of Corbyn or the carrot of power, the new Tory coalition could fracture. And those Tory parts of the southeast, where the party's loss of support amongst the grandees is particularly a problem, might start to consider flying under different colours, especially if the leader of the Tories turns out to following the defeat is not to their liking. There are already complaints that amongst many of the Southern Tories that regard the recent gained seats in the North have received much more attention from the party leadership than they do. And the emphasis on the cultural issues that can appeal to the Red Wall can be a massive turnoff for the Blue Heartlands. One Tory in a very prosperous seat with the Lib Dems breathing down his neck told me most recently that they would do better in his constituency as a kind of British version of the German Free Democrats. Think the second coming of Michael Portillo. Low taxes, pro-business, uninterested in the culture wars, and skeptical of the expensive regional policies such as levelling up. Under a more proportional electoral system, such a faction might be removed from the realm of reflection to reality. At the next election, the Tories will be going for a fifth consecutive term, something no party has ever achieved in the modern British era. The electoral pendulum would suggest that they are unlikely to keep winning indefinitely. But the biggest worries for the Tories is how defeat could see the party political playing field tilt against them for good. And that is ultimately, I think, the biggest question the Tories really have on their mind. They know electoral reform is coming. They can't stop it. This has been gaining momentum for years. And even after the 2012 vote, it didn't drop because the campaigners just said, look, what's been put forward is not the electoral reform we want. You're basically putting forward, the AV vote, which is essentially sort of the first past the post version of, of a PR voting system. That's why it wasn't overly popular. That's why a lot of people boycotted, because they didn't want that type of system. They wanted and preferred the STV system, which is what a lot of people want. That's the system that we need to go for. And if we do get that electoral reform, that is what we need to push for, an STV system, because you can push forward and you can say, look, the Tories will never gain power ever again. We can avoid this disaster of a government that we have had. And not only that, but we need to start ringing the bells for reforming the House of Lords as well, because you cannot reform one without the other. You can certainly reform the House of Lords, but you cannot reform the Westminster voting system and then leave the House of Lords as it is. That needs to be drastically reformed as well. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called the YouTube thank you button. Do not use the Buy Me Coffee link at the moment, because like I said, it has been hacked, which is frustrating. But there you go. As always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.